Okay, thank you very much, and I would like to thank UNEP for inviting me to present this last in a series of 3 webinars on the findings from our project, Growing Coffee Without Endosulfan. So just to give you a little background of where and how we collected these experiences from farmers, we visited 22 farms in 2 regions of Latin America, Colombia and Central America, and we deliberately chose 2 regions with different coffee flowering and fruiting patterns because, as you heard in the video, this really influences the biology and the behavior of the coffee berry borer and therefore how you manage this pest. We also wanted to find out farmers' control methods on a range of farm sizes, from small holdings right up to large estates. And all but one of the farmers we interviewed are certified under at least one of the different sustainability standards that you can see listed here. This means that they've all had several seasons at least of not being allowed to use endosulfan under the requirements of those standards, and therefore they have had to develop effective alternative control methods, and that was what we were interested in finding out about. So I'd now like to share some points about using traps as a control method for coffee borer, reinforcing what we saw in the video. When we were interviewing farmers, we asked them questions to help us assess the pros and cons of the different IPM methods that they reported in use. And obviously, effectiveness is the first criterion. So we found that the most important point is that trapping will not work as a mass capture method in every coffee growing region. It's only feasible as a control method in regions like Central America, where you have a very definite off-season or dry season extending for at least several weeks, if not months, and therefore you have a period during the year when there are no young green berries developing in the coffee groves. We found that just under half of farmers we interviewed in El Salvador and Nicaragua have started using traps in recent years, with very good results for coffee berry borer management. In Colombia, however, where you do get green berries present in the groves all year round, trapping will only work as a monitoring tool. And actually, we found that not that many farmers are using them for that purpose. They do other monitoring, but not necessarily using traps. So obviously, another important question is, how much does trapping cost? We learned that it's considerably cheaper than insecticide use if you make your own trap, the containers for the attractant, using recycled secondhand soft drinks bottles, 1 2-liter bottles of Coca-Cola, those kind of things. Collect those up, and you can use those, as we saw in the video. If you use the commercial traps, such as Brocap and others, they are rather more expensive because you're actually having to pay something like maybe $3 or $4 per trap. You can see the cost estimates here for the attractant, so that's the mix of alcohols, and the dispenser, which allows it to be released slowly into the atmosphere. And you can see also how much these costs equate to per hectare at the recommended trap density on a large farm, compared with the average of 2 applications per season of endosulfan. The export company Coex in El Salvador have done a really good detailed cost comparison of trapping compared with endosulfan use. You can read that in detail on the project website hosted by 4C. one of the presentations from the Bogota workshop, and their head agronomist, René Fontan, will be joining the Spanish webinar this week. So I hope we can get an update from him on how well their work in promoting use of the traps is going with their large estate suppliers of coffee. In terms of labour time, as we heard from Don Alfonso in the video, making and setting the traps really doesn't take much time. And here are some estimates for the different tasks on large farms. So really it's considerably less time than handling and spraying insecticides. And we also heard that really it's very easy to implement with a minimum of training. Farmers and workers soon get the idea, and farmers will start adapting the method to suit their conditions. For example, several farmers told us that they are putting out more traps in plots where they know they regularly get high borer infestation levels, or particularly where their plots are next to neighbour farms which maybe don't manage coffee borer well, and where they know that they're getting adult borers flying in from those badly managed traps next door. So some further points about using the traps, and I'd like to stress again the most important point, which is when the female borers emerge from fallen berries, where they've been reproducing, they are always going to be more attracted to the natural odours released by the developing green berries than to the alcohol mix. So if you're going to get the traps to work properly, you need to put the traps in place during the dry season in Central America so that they are already releasing their attractant when the first rains come, which triggers the flight of the females. So if you put them in and there are already green berries in the groves, the borer will just go to the berries and not to the traps. And as with all integrated pest management methods, trapping only works well if you combine it with very good cultural controls. And colleagues in Central America said that if you don't do a good cleanup of your groves post-harvest, in other words, getting rid, picking, collecting as many of the berries left on the trees, and particularly those that have fallen on the ground, if you don't do a good job of that, then you may find that trapping alone may be insufficient to keep the pest populations levels of those under control at the start of the following season. The use of methanol and ethanol is often not for public retail in many countries because they pose an ingestion hazard if you drink it. So certainly in Nicaragua and El Salvador, farmers can only obtain these alcohols from the technical support organizations that they're working with, so either the farmer cooperatives or ProCafe, the research institute in El Salvador, or maybe COEX as a big exporter who is able to get bulk supplies through the wholesale chemical market. However, that means that because they can't just go into any small shop and buy them, farmers can only get them through technically qualified organizations who can supply filled dispensers to farmers as part of a training and advisory program, which means they can really explain the hazards for ingestion and how to make sure that vulnerable people, children, but also alcoholics, don't get hold of them. And you can find more details about the trapping in the project document on the website. I'd like to briefly mention some other physical control methods because they are quite useful. You'll find that paths between different coffee plots on a farm, at the weighing points for picked coffee in the field, and obviously at the pulping and processing stations on farm, you often get very high levels of coffee berry borer. The adults will often tend to come out of the beans when they're being moved and picked and try and escape. So the various methods that are listed here on the right-hand side, these can help reduce the numbers of borers that escape from picked berries or from pulp, and help you reduce the likelihood that you're going to get those reinfesting your other plots. Farmers explain to us that they're easy to implement and maintain. They don't really require much cost. And we heard that 77% of the Colombian farmers we interviewed are using at least one of these methods at their processing station and during picking operations. So they are not a major control method, but for farms that are wanting to minimize their damage from this pest, especially those that are wanting to reduce or minimize their use of insecticides, they all highlighted that these small physical control methods are very useful to stop preventable movement of the adults from one site to another during the normal picking and harvesting operations. So I'm going to finish with some more general conclusions from our project. Firstly, we learnt from the farmers that we interviewed that they are able to manage coffee berry borer without endosulfan perfectly feasibly. They've achieved good control with a range of IPM alternatives across a wide range of different farm sizes, climates, altitudes, pest levels, cropping systems, and irrespective of farmer education and age. Secondly, it's a myth that endosulfan alternatives are always more expensive. In the case of trapping, it's considerably cheaper than standard endosulfan applications. And farmers also said that they don't find other IPM methods too costly either. And actually, IPM can deliver benefits too in protecting workers' health, protecting wildlife, and resulting in much less pollution than when you're using hazardous insecticides. This is really all about implementing the Stockholm Convention phase-out requirements on endosulfan, and obviously endosulfan also is on the Rotterdam pick list. Now, countries which still have not banned endosulfan may be worried about what will the economic consequences be for their coffee sector if they suddenly ban endosulfan. But what we learned is that very good and cost-effective alternatives are already being used by some farmers, so it is possible. However, what is essential is for governments and the coffee sector to collaborate, supporting farmers with training and advice on how to use these alternatives in their different situations. And farmer support organizations like the Colombian Federation of Coffee Growers and the cooperatives in Nicaragua, coffee research institutes like ProCafé in El Salvador, along with sustainability standards like Fair Trade, Woods, Rainforest Alliance. Altogether, these play an essential role in phasing out endosulfan and replacing it with safer IPM methods. So here you can see the project webpage links. These are kindly hosted by our partner 4C Coffee Association, and you can find out more on this website by looking at the different IPM methods we documented in detail. So not just trapping, which we talked about today, but also cultural controls, biological control, monitoring, which is very important for this pest, chemical control too. You can view all the videos currently in English or Spanish. You can see the detailed guidance that each farmer gave us and the story of their farm in the specific case studies. The presentations and the recordings of the discussion of these webinar series will also be available via the UNEP webinar series pages. And in the Spanish version, of the trapping webinar, which will be this week. We're lucky to have my collaborator from El Salvador, Dr. Adán Hernández, who's a researcher expert on trapping, and he'll be able to answer questions much better than me. So if you speak Spanish, then you can join us this Thursday, but maybe we can also develop some questions to ask him on Thursday too. So thank you all very much for your interest, and I would like to acknowledge all the farmers like Henry Zelaya here from Nicaragua, who gave their time and experiences to share, along with the cooperatives and other technical support organizations who helped organize the visits for us. Thank you.